look, many supplements are not cheap, but I will tell you, there is really something about like you kind of get what you pay for. That's why like anytime you see like whether it's a private label product or like a super value brand on Amazon, if you're seeing everyone else is like $30, $40 and these guys are $9.99, like you got to do the math.
You're listening to Real Returns, where we learn how real leaders are finding real purpose through the work they do. Join your hosts, Andrew and Dan, as they interview leaders about how their businesses are creating meaningful change for individuals and communities around the world.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Real Returns podcast. I am your host, Andrew Reichert. Super excited about today's episode. Some of you may know, but I am a bit of a health and fitness enthusiast. And oftentimes I'll be out to lunch or out to dinner and I'll pull out my lunch or dinner packet of supplements. And all of a sudden, everybody's eyes open like, is he really going to take 12 or 14 pills at one time? I take about 40 pills a day. And I was just talking to Afif about that. And I'm so excited to have Afif Ghannoum on the show today. He is CEO of CPG Radar. He's built this platform that uses big data and AI to help consumer brands really think about and accelerate their innovations. So welcome to the show, Afif.
Thanks for having me.
So what's going on with your business today? Like there's a lot happening in the world of supplements, CPG products today. I mean, really, it's booming. I mean, supplements are hitting an all-time high. You know, what are some of the dynamics that you're seeing in today's market?
So supplements went from being almost fringe, maybe let's say 20 years ago, to now almost being on the same level of, a pharmaceutical drug where people turn to them as a solution to keep, their health and wellness going. So as a result, what we've seen is just the acceleration of more brands coming to market, hundreds of thousands of products coming to market, and more aggressive claims about what the products can do, sometimes backed up by science saying that they can actually do it and sometimes not. So that's kind of the world where when I was previously running a probiotic business, I thought, man, it is increasingly tough to figure out all these different dimensions, right? Like what's the science? Is there actually science to say that? Like what is the latest brand launch doing? Are consumers even aware of this, right? It was just millions and millions of inputs that you got to really think through. So I thought, there's got to be a better way to do this. And that's how I came up with CPG Radar.
Yeah, amazing. And again, just to put the industry, at least the supplement industry, into numbers, I just saw $72.9 billion is spent on supplements, at least was spent last year. And that's a 5.5% growth over the last year. So not only is it a huge number, it's growing fast. And I think to your point, it's also starting to feel more real where the data is backing up the actual results. So, we like to talk about impact. Let's just talk specifically about that for a moment. So how do you think about, the impact of whether it's supplements or other, consumer brands and consumer packaged goods and the impact that they have on a person? Like how does that actually get measured?
Well, the simplest way I think about it is not only, do these products actually have the ability or potential to impact your health and wellness, but even more simplistic than that, every day you're putting these actually into your body, right? And that is a huge trust factor. It's not like a toy or like, a piece of clothing where if the quality's okay, it's annoying, but you kind of live and learn. Like you're hoping this thing is not only able to do what it says it does, but it's actually safe, right? So that is a real responsibility in the industry that, our way of looking at it is if we can help companies actually accelerate their innovation, have better science behind the products they're doing, and marry it with what consumers actually want, that's a win, right? Because, you can have the best product in the world, but if consumers don't know they want it or aren't interested or don't understand it, it really doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So we look at impact a couple different ways. Can you explain what a product does? Can you actually make that product and use better ingredients, more unique formulations, but also have the science to back it up? So that's kind of how I think about impact.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about this 85-15 principle? Because I've heard you mention that before. I think it's really brilliant.
Yeah. So if you think of, and this goes for anything in life, but in this context, if you think of innovation as a 100% process, the last 15% of what you want to be doing is really that kind of nitty gritty strategic decision making, right? Like the critical decisions is kind of how I look at that 15%. That's how you actually come up with products. You're deciding like a brand name, all those things that truly are the highest level decisions. The problem is the first 85% of that process is just a grind, like actually going through, doing the research, figuring out what others are doing, looking at the science, trying to get your head around what consumers think. And by the time you do all of that, it's already out of date, right? So,
Yeah.
and the problem is, just because it's not like the critical 15, it doesn't mean it's not extremely important. It's just so, a lot of times we see companies get really bogged down in that part. So my goal was not to replace that whole 100%, but if I can get you to that last 15% with deeper, more sophisticated insights a lot quicker, that is a huge value driver, for a partner. So that's what we always say is like, hey, anyone that tells you AI or big data is going to like solve that 100%, that's not real. Your expectation should be like, can you help me get to those final decision points I need to be making? So that's when I talk about the 85-15 principle, that's what I'm talking about.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's just pick a product. Like let's say omega-3s, for example. I mean, one of the things that I've heard you mention is kind of it's maybe labeled in different ways. And it's really hard to get at like what is this actual thing. So how does what you're doing help to like understand what's actually in those supplements and what it's doing?
Yeah, and it's actually when you take a step back, this is one of the challenges with AI, right? So you hear everybody's heard about hallucinations or inaccurate information, and the problem is when you read an AI output, oftentimes it's extremely well written and it's convincing, right? So
Yeah.
you know what I mean? That's one of the big challenges. So the example I always give is if you think of financial data from Japan to the US, it's reported exactly the same way. It's structured the same way. It's reported the same KPIs, all that. In dietary supplements, omega-3s in the US alone are shown 70 different ways on labels. The way it's actually written, omega-3, omega-3, like all sorts of variations. Consumers call it fish oil, right? When we're analyzing, we analyze about 14 million consumer conversations on a monthly basis. They are not thinking oftentimes about the ingredient in the technical name. They're calling it fish oil, right? So you have omega-3s, 70 different ways, fish oil. And then when you look at the scientific literature, they talk about DHA and EPA in that fish oil. So the problem is if you put a prompt into, an AI platform, you're hoping and expecting that the large language model is able to normalize all that and figure out, oh, when they're saying omega-3 on this label and this consumer's talking about fish oil and this clinical trial publication is talking about DHA, EPA, that's all the same thing, right? The reality is it doesn't do that, right? So it'll confuse and say like, oh, yeah, magnesium, glycinate, citrate, all these different types of magnesium, it's all the same thing as magnesium. It's not. Those are all very different forms of magnesium. So one of the things we spend a tremendous amount of time, we have a huge team that this is all they do, is normalize that data. So when we structure, tag all of our data so that when we feed it into our LLM, it doesn't have to guess and surmise, oh, these are related. We're telling it, these are related. These are all the same ingredient, or these are all different, right? So that's one of the things that is a real challenge, not only in our industry, but anywhere where you're hoping an AI platform can go fetch information. Hopefully it's credible information, bring it back, make sense of it, and then give you an answer. And if it doesn't have a good answer, it'll build that logical bridge to give you something that looks great. That's why you hear about these like lawsuits being filed with, fictional case references and things, because the LLM's like, well, I can't say I don't know. So I'll make something up, So that normalization thing was something we really had to figure out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so just to kind of like double click on something you mentioned earlier, these are things that we actually put in our body. And so it's different than like you said, clothes, where it's like, okay, well, if it doesn't work, who cares? I throw it out. Um, what about, I don't even know how you would grade it, but like quality or purity. Like one of the brands I really like is Thorn, for example. Like it's well researched or pure encapsulations.
Yeah.
I take a good bit of life extension depending on the product, but like I like to know that there's been some research behind it. Like, is that part of your data set as well?
Yeah. So the three brands you mentioned and Pure Encapsulations owned by Nestle Health Science. So um, you got to understand, I see behind the curtain of all sorts of companies, and I kind of put them in different buckets, right? And this is really the way you should look at the supplement industry. Some brands, if you're looking at the spectrum, are unbelievable marketers, right? From
Yeah.
to hoodies to supplements, they are just amazing marketers. Some are Amazon experts, other now emerging like TikTok experts. They just know how to sell, right? What we often see is them then coming to us to try and backfill once they've kind of hit real scale, backfill the science, backfill with better ingredients. And there's a whole universe of guys that never do that because it's working just fine. Now, if the FTC ever comes to them, that'll be a different story. But pure marketers. The other side of the spectrum, which are the kind of brands you're talking about, it's this side of pharma level science and quality. And a misnomer that a lot of people will say is like, oh, dietary supplements, yeah, it's not regulated. That's actually not true. When people say that, what they mean is that it's not pre-approved to sell like a true FDA approved drug is, right? Like, think of any pharmaceutical, we're all familiar with. You cannot sell that drug till it's actually been approved by FDA. Supplements, beauty products, most OTC medications, you don't need permission to sell the product. You can just sell it, but you are regulated by FDA. So what that means is like they have to have good manufacturing practices when they make it. The ingredients have to be GRAS, like generally regarded as safe. There's all sorts of quality standards they have to hit, right? They have to do, all sorts of safety testing. Now, the type of brands you're talking about will take it to the next level with the type of not only testing they're doing, but transparency on the type of quality implementation they're doing. At often a great expense because, like take an ingredient like creatine. There's obviously a million creatine brands. I know if I'm buying Thorne creatine, it is extremely high quality. It's like NSF and all these qualifications. Like I'm worried about the quality of that ingredient. I've been in factories where the bottles are moving so fast and totes of material are moving so fast, it literally looks like a blur, right? They're moving kilos in this. And I remember I was in one factory and there's a giant black box that everything was going through. And I said, what is that? And they said, oh, that's a magnet to pull heavy metals out of the ingredient. We source it from China, and sometimes that can be an issue. And I thought, what?
Gosh, that's terrifying.
You know what I mean? And so, like, supplements, like, look, many supplements are not cheap, but I will tell you, there is really something about, like, you kind of get what you pay for. That's why, like, anytime you see, like, whether it's a private label product or like a super value brand, Amazon, if you're seeing everyone else is like $30, $40 and these guys are $9.99, like, you got to do the math, right? For them to spend money on Amazon, they're probably buying it for a couple dollars. The guy making it is making money, right? For them to be able to do that, these have to be like pretty low quality ingredients. The quality's not there, So I always tell people that, like, you got to remember, this is going in your body, right? So yeah, of course, to work, but first and foremost, you got to make sure it's safe,
Yeah. And I'm sure there's, just for the average person out there, things that they could be thinking of. So for example, I use this app called Subco where I have all my supplements in there. And for Thorne, it's actually one of the highest rated ones. This isn't an ad for Thorne, but it looks at inactive ingredients, manufacturing standards, testing benchmarks, product quality, product certifications, and technical innovation. Are those like some of the data points that people should be looking at? Are there other ones you would think about as well?
Yeah. So there's general rules of thumb. I'm not a big fan of going, like, and a lot of us do this, and I'm definitely guilty of this. Going on Amazon, price shopping, like, oh, it's got hundreds of reviews. I guess it should be good. And by the way, it's like, killer price. And then when you do a little digging, there's really not much to this company, right? So, as an example, we help ingredient companies. One of the other things we do, we help ingredient companies find brands that are a really good fit for their technology. We use our AI platform, and it's, we can tell them down, to really granular detail, like why your product should be, or their ingredients should be able to help this brand grow, right? Maybe they're having a consumer issue with taste, efficacy, something like that. One of the things we do, and you'll see where I'm going with this, is we help them get contacts for the decision makers. So they, email, LinkedIn, telephone address. It is not uncommon that there'll be some brand that our ingredient partners want to talk to because they can just see this thing is on fire on Amazon or TikTok. We want to get to them before, everybody and their mother is trying to sell them ingredients. And when we go to find the contacts, if we can't find them, we use, all sorts of platforms to find contacts. If it comes up blank, the next thing we'll do is we'll say, oh, well, who's registered the trademark? Maybe it's owned by a different company, and that company's the one actually doing it. You'd be shocked how many of them we can trace back to. This literally happened yesterday. We had 5 companies all using the same address of some random strip mall in Connecticut somewhere. And there were all these Chinese brands that looked really slick on Amazon. But when it comes to it, it's basically a P.O. box, right? I personally, I don't want a product. Who knows how this is made, right? Like, so especially if you're using products on an ongoing basis, like take a minute, go on, the website, like, do they talk about their science? Do they talk about their quality? Like, is that, is it owned? It's that, I hate to say this, but like, if you're buying a Unilever brand or a Nestle brand or something like that, you're getting high quality just because of kind of the mothership involved.
Right.
Like the Thorns of the world or the Life Extensions, like these, you just go on their website, you can see, man, these are very high quality standards they're meeting, right? So if it's a high quality company, they're putting it out there because they know that's a differentiator now, right? Especially, I think before we went on air, I told you, like, just in probiotics, a few years ago, there were like 200-300 probiotic product launches a year. Now there's over 1,200. When I first started, I was in OTC oral care. The only viable way to sell a product, to a mass audience was through retail. And the retailers are the gatekeepers, right? So if you weren't high quality, you didn't have like a real company behind you, next to impossible to get distribution like a CVS or a Walmart. Now with TikTok, with Amazon, all those barriers have been removed, right? So all it takes is like, even now with AI, even less renderings of bottles, and you can start selling stuff. And you would, we could talk for 5 hours about the stories I've heard of people to save like a quarter penny a serving, the shortcuts they'll take with the ingredient quality, and it's sad. It's sad. Like, that happens a lot. So,
wow. That's good to know. I mean, honestly, I've learned just from having talked through this, the importance of kind of the work you do and the importance of really understanding what you're putting in your body. I guess a related question, and this is a bit of a pivot, but what do you think about peptides?
So peptides is an interesting topic. So the reality is, I was telling you before we went on air. So one of the things we talk about is we call it the true benefits analysis, right? And there's 3 levers we look at. Is there science? Are people marketing this ingredient in market? Like, are there brands out there actually selling, making claims? And third, do consumers have a particular perception about the ingredient, right? So you can have something like postbiotics, amazing science. Formulators love it. It can go in all sorts of products, and postbiotics are basically dead probiotics. You can put them in food, put them in drinks very easily. You can't do that with probiotics. So postbiotics are a very exciting industry. The problem is consumers are completely confused as to what a postbiotic is, right? So that's a challenge. Now, going back to your question about peptides, it's kind of a reverse. There's interesting, like intriguing science, but it's not to the level that you see some of these claims being made of, kind of a wonder ingredient. So the consumer perception is extremely high and growing. The science is still lagging behind. So it's one of those. But when you look at the third pillar, like, are people out there selling it? Yeah, there's a lot of people trying to get on that, and we see that all the time. Like you see it with NAD, you see it with like creatine gummies, right? So creatine gummies, one of the hottest formats, because who doesn't like a gummy, right? Like, it's a nice way to take a. The problem is the early versions of creatine gummies, because of the way gummies are created, it would actually change the form of the creatine and actually could make it a dangerous form of the creatine, or
wow,
would just dissipate all the creatine in the gummy. The problem was you had Joe Rogan, you had other people with huge followings telling people, oh, I love creatine gummies. It's a great way for me to get my creatine. That makes the consumer demand just go through the roof, right? So over the last year, now the science has kind of caught up. There's some really good options, but there was a whole swath of brands seeing consumer sentiment going through the roof and just launching products that were really not efficacious. So one of another great brand is Now Foods. The reason I mentioned that is their CEO, Jim Emmy, he's this great guy. He did this initiative started a few years ago where they'd see like people making crazy claims and they would buy a bunch of the products and test them, and they would publish their results. And one of the things I'm almost positive they did it around was creatine gummies, showing these things have creatine. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, which is basically, for any ingredient, at the end of the day, a dietary supplement is something that should supplement your diet to do something for your health and wellness. They are not, right? They really are not. It's something that, I remember when I ran my microbiome company, Biome, we would have people say like, I have Crohn's, I lost part of my stomach, I had to have it removed. Will your probiotic help me do X, Y, Z? And we're like, hey, no, you've got it all wrong. We have a great only support your digestive health. You need to be talking to your doctor, right? Like,
totally.
And the other thing people do is, there's kind of like a couple different types of people on the spectrum, right? So there's people that they really treat supplements as kind of a cure-all or like wonder pill. The other is that they're turning to dietary supplements while eating horrendous diets.
Garbage, yeah.
And so they're spending all this money on even high quality dietary supplements. Like, oh yeah, I'm not feeling well, it's not doing it. It's like, no. Your diet is awful, right? So analogy I always give it, it's like we've all been stuck behind a guy on a carbon fiber bike, Lycra suit, the amazing, shaped helmet, but he's 85 pounds of weight, right? And you're like, dude, you don't need all that. Just lose some weight and you will buy much faster, right? So a lot of times, and it's the old, like, everybody wants a shortcut, right?
Yeah.
So
for sure.
People turn to dietary supplements, sometimes, and sadly, some people in the supplement industry are more than happy to take that money. So, yep, it does do this. Yep, it does do that. Take this pill, you'll lose weight. The reality is it's not there.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Well, I appreciate the work that you're doing. I think at the end of the day, data is what we need to make sure that we're making wise decisions as consumers. And, I think you're sort of right at the center of that. So I can't believe how fast this went, but we've got to move to conclude. So before we let you go, what's a way that our listeners can get in touch with you or follow kind of what you're up to and what you're building?
So probably the easiest is LinkedIn, just putting my name in LinkedIn, and always happy to connect with people on there. And our website, cpgradar.com.
Great. We'll make sure we include that in the show notes. And thank you so much, Afif, for joining. I learned a ton. Again, I could have talked about this all day. I'm a bit of a supplement geek. And so it was really fun having you on the show. Thanks so much to our listeners for listening in. We appreciate all that you do. And if you haven't already subscribed to our newsletter, you can check it out at realreturnspodcast.com. Looking forward to connecting with you all next time, and we'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to Real Returns. Tune in every other Wednesday for more conversations around investing, entrepreneurship, and how business can instill a sense of purpose.